Okay, so we're in our study of the Beatitudes found in Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12. And today we are looking at Matthew 5, verse 6. Blessed are the hungry. Blessed are the hungry. So around my house, we talk about food a lot. And we're eating food a lot. I wish it looked like this. It doesn't always look like this, but my wife is a fantastic cook. And she always makes things beautiful, as well as Eliana and Evangeline setting the table. So it kind of looks like that sometimes. But from the moment my children awake, the conversation begins about food, right? Everly at the crack of dawn, Daddy, I'm so hungry, I want to eat, And so we're like, okay, we'll get you something going here pretty soon. Just hang on, Then Evangeline wakes up, Dad, I'm hungry. Can I get something? I'm like, wait, just hang on, And then before I hear a chair scooting across the kitchen floor, and I know what's going on, she scooted it over by the fridge so that she can climb up and get cereal down from the top. I'm like, okay, it's coming. I'm getting food, right? And then they begin eating the food, but before the food is gone, the bowl still has cereal in the bottom. Daddy, I'm so full. I'm like, okay, you don't have 2 more bites, okay? And then she takes her 2 bites, and then we're done, and then I clean her face, and then it's on. And then maybe an hour later, I need a snack, Daddy, I'm so hungry. I'm like, what? It's this constant ebb and flow of hungry and I'm full. Hungry and I'm full. What's for dinner tonight? Evangeline's asking at like 10:30 in the morning. It's like everything about our minds is focused on these touch points through the day of what am I going to eat? How will I be satisfied? Why is that the case, that we're always hungry for food and then never quite satisfied because we want more after it's gone? And I think it's kind of like a metaphor for all of life too. Do you feel that way about other things in life? That you're wanting things, but never quite satisfied with them as well. I think about this verse. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart. Yet so, that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. What does that mean? Scholars have talked about this for a long time. What does it mean that God has put eternity into our hearts? What's happening here? Oh, okay. All right. You two people just ignore the child. What does it mean that God has put eternity into man's heart? A lot of scholars, and I agree with this too, think that God has put an eternal longing in us for something eternal, something lasting. But because we just don't have access for eternity yet, we're always hungry still. It's never quite satisfying us, right? The trouble is, people throughout time always try to fill this need for something eternal with something that's finite, something that won't last, right? I mean, like Willie Nelson said, we're looking for love in all the wrong places. I mean, who thought he was so wise? But he understands, okay, this idea here that eternity is set in our hearts. We're always longing for something and never quite satisfied. And so people look for that satisfaction in other places. Whether it's relationships that are broken again and again and again, or whether it's food, or whether it's drugs, or whether it's comfort or luxury, the right automobile, the right job, the right home, whatever it is, we're kind of constantly looking but never quite satisfied because God has put eternity in our hearts, but we try to fill that with something that's not eternal, something that's finite and won't satisfy. C.S. Lewis said this, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Okay? If we're all longing for something but never quite satisfied, maybe it's because God made us for eternity with Him. And we haven't gotten there yet. So I want to follow this thread today and think about this when it comes to the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, 1 through 12, but especially verse 6 that we'll be seeing today. But let's read this passage again together here. Matthew 5, starting in verse 1. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All right. So, we've been moving through the Beatitudes here, and each week we've seen something so far about how God says the disciple of Jesus, the one that follows him, is blessed, what his life looks like. Okay? So first of all, the disciple we've seen is poor in spirit. They're marked by poverty of spirit. The disciple realizes there isn't anything within me that I can offer to God that he needs, that is good. I, in myself, am hopelessly lost. I just need the Lord. So the disciple starts out by recognizing he's poor in spirit. He needs to be made full by the Lord. He needs to receive who he is by the Lord. That led us on to the next one, where that person grieves over sin. And that's a grieving over his personal sin, recognizing the sin in his own life, but also recognizing the fallenness in our world. The sin, universal. So the disciple of Jesus mourns sin. And then that leads to the next thing, that he approaches God and man with meekness. How can you do otherwise if you realize, in myself here I'm poor in spirit, and I'm grieving over my sin and the sin of the world? That puts you in a posture of meekness and humility before God. So we approach God and man with meekness. And then today we're going to say, that's not quite enough. I mean, that would be one thing to be marked by poverty of spirit, to grieve over sin and approach God and man with meekness, but it doesn't stop there. You don't just stay in the state of, everything's terrible and I stink and I've got nothing to offer, and so I'm just going to stay here on the ground. You know? Instead, the Beatitudes lead you to the next thing. He's hungry for something more. Hungry and thirsty for righteousness. Okay? So that's the way that the Beatitudes are leading us here. Okay? So what is righteousness? If the disciple of Jesus is supposed to be hungry and thirsty for that, what are we talking about when he says righteousness? Well, first of all, let's just see what Jesus has to say about it. Okay? The Beatitudes are at the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And that sermon is contained between Matthew 5 and 7, all the way through there. Okay? So in the Gospel of Matthew, that word righteousness is used 7 times. But 4 of those times are right here in this particular sermon. So let's see what Jesus has to say about what righteousness is. The first time it comes up in his sermon is Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now that doesn't tell us much about what righteousness is, but it tells you that sometimes being righteous is going to bring bad things for your life, okay? It might bring persecution by those on the outside, okay? That's the first thing we see here. In Matthew 5:20 it says, For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So righteousness here is talked about in comparison to the scribes and Pharisees. Well, the scribes and Pharisees, who were those guys? Those were the ones in their culture there in Jesus' time. These were the righteous of the righteous. These were the very holy people. You looked at them and they would come walking through the marketplace and you'd go, man, that person is someone. I mean, look at the way they're dressed. All the tassels and, he just looks really important and really smart, And boy, he's so pious. He's always blowing trumpets and he's giving his tithes out, and he just tithes of everything, including mint and cumin and whatever that stuff is, he's a really righteous person, right? They were the top of the righteous food chain. Okay, righteousness has nothing to do with California surfer terms, by the way. Okay, so get that out of your mind. So righteousness seems to be shown in what a person does. He says, unless your righteousness exceeds or is more than the scribes and the Pharisees, you don't enter the kingdom of heaven. And hearing that, the people hearing the Sermon on the Mount must have thought, how is that possible? They're the most righteous people we know. Of course, they weren't seeing into the person's hearts. They were just seeing the things that they were doing. Okay, so we read that verse and we think, okay, so it has a little bit to do with our acts of piety and righteousness, what we do. Chapter 6, verse 1 says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. So these righteous acts, they're seen, they're coming out. It's what we do, it's what we say. But what's the motivation behind it? Is it so that, like some of the scribes and Pharisees, they can be thought really important? Really great? Boy, everybody wants to be that guy. And he says, beware of that. Don't do righteous things so that you can get approval from men. Instead, you need to be doing it for God's sake. Okay? Do your righteousness for Him. So again, we're seeing here, righteousness has to do with what you're saying, what you're doing. It's outward acts, but what's the motivation inside? It needs to be motivated by God and not by me getting approval from men. And then finally, chapter 6, verse 33 kind of summarizes this, I think. He says, but seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto you. He said, seek God's righteousness and let the other things fall where they may. That verse comes in kind of a section here where Jesus is saying, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about providing for yourself this and that and the other. Where's that going to come from? God will provide for you. If He makes the lilies of the field so beautiful and He takes care of the sparrows, won't He take care of you who's made in His own image? Seek Him first and seek His righteousness first. And this other stuff will all be taken care of. Okay? So we see from this here that righteousness has to do with God's heart. And it comes out in good and righteous acts. So when you see that word righteousness, you could literally think rightness or goodness, right? It's right as far as God defines it here. It's goodness, okay? But it's not my goodness because I'm poor in spirit. It's God's righteousness that we're looking to show, that the disciple looks to show. Okay, so God's righteousness acted out through His disciples. Okay? I mean, think about one of our favorite books of the Bible. You look at Acts in the New Testament, and you see the church active there. It's the Acts of the Apostles, but it's by the power of the Spirit of God. It's God working through the church to do these great things. So righteousness, when you see that word, think goodness, but think it's God's goodness that's acted out by His disciples. And so this disciple hungers and thirsts for righteousness. In the same way Everly gets up in the morning and said, Daddy, I'm so hungry. You, the disciple of Jesus, are hungry for God's righteousness. And He makes this promise. When you're hungry for that, when you're hungry for God's goodness and His rightness, you will be satisfied. Now that's a future tense word. Shall be satisfied. So the question is, just like my kids always say, when? When's breakfast? When's lunch? When's dinner? When can we have our nighttime snack? I'm always wanting, but never really fully satisfied. When will I finally be satisfied? Well, just like with food, there's a paradox set up here. that I'm hungry and I'm filled for a short time, but then I'm hungry again. And it keeps going on in this cycle. And that seems a little frustrating, but it's a good thing, because God has set us up as his people, the disciples of Jesus, to always want and to grow. If you're satisfied right here and right now, you will never grow anymore. So he put this, remember that passage from Ecclesiastes 3:11. He set eternity in your hearts. He wants you to want more, to continue to hunger and thirst, and to continue to grow. So we're satisfied here and now a little bit, but it draws us on and on for future times as well. It's both together. All right, so look at Isaiah 55, 1 through 2. This verse came to my mind considering this today. God invites us, "Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. He who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food." Think back again, to our scholar Willie Nelson that says we look for love in all the wrong places. God says, I'm the source of righteousness. I'm the source of goodness. I'm the source of what will satisfy you. He said, you don't even have to have any money. He said, just come without any money. Come buy and eat. I'll give it to you for free. And here you can have it without price, without any requirement on you. All you have to do is come to me, and I'll provide it for you. You will be satisfied. But throughout history, people have said, no, I think I'm going to look over here. No, I'm going to try this. No, I'm going to depend on myself. No, I'm going to pursue comfort or luxury, or on it goes. And we look for satisfaction and to be filled in other places when God is the one. He's the source. He's the one that has what will truly satisfy us. We, Jesus' disciples, are called to hunger for righteousness. So, let me ask you a question. Are you hungry? Are you hungry for God's righteousness? If you're not, I think that there's, and probably all of us in one respect or another, can improve in our hungering for God's righteousness. So I hope we can share some things today that will help you in this way. Number one, I think, in improving our hunger for God's righteousness is you need to honestly assess what you currently crave. Okay? What is it that you want? And you could go, well, I want God's righteousness. Well, yes, you do sometimes, but think about the way you spend your time, the way you spend your money, what you're investing yourself and your heart in. What is the motivation for you and what you do and what you spend on? Is it for man or is it for God? Honestly assess what you currently crave. And if you see some things here that, boy, I really crave this, and it's not a very righteous thing, maybe we need to make some changes there. So honestly assess what you crave now, and then go to number two, make some dietary changes, okay? If you are wanting the wrong things, if all you want is chocolate and ice cream, it's not going to be good for you. In the same way, if we don't want what is righteous and good, then we need to make some changes there. But I want to urge you, just like if you were going to make some kind of crash course diet to lose a bunch of weight, but then as soon as you've hit that mark, okay, lost my 20 pounds, I'm good. Back to the ice cream, Probably not going to be a good way to go. So instead, plan for the long haul. Make some small changes in your life to help you with this hungering for righteousness. For example, you might think, I just don't read the Word of God enough. I need to hunger for His Word more. Well, you could go, all right, I'm going to read the entire Bible in a month. I think you could do it, but it might be kind of hard if you're not reading the Bible at all to go from 0 to read the whole thing in a month. That wouldn't be a good dietary change for you. It would be too much. Maybe say, I'm going to read a chapter a day. Make a small change there, one that you can achieve that will help you to grow in your hungering for God's righteousness here. Plan for the long haul. Make small changes that will continue to set you on a trajectory where you can grow in your hunger for His righteousness. Number 3, give your hunger memory. What do I mean by that? Well, let me just tell you from my own life some things. It's Sunday. To me, Sunday night equals nachos at home. That's what it is for me, and I hardly let anything stand in the way. For my kids, it's McDonald's, okay? After we have church in Weiser, then my kids are immediately, before we even walking out the door, Dad, we're going to McDonald's? Of course we're going to McDonald's, okay? I don't want to make your mom have to cook dinner after we get home from this long day. We're going to get McDonald's, you'll eat it on the way home, and all will be good, but I am not going to eat McDonald's. I'm holding up for nachos when I get home, okay? Sunday night comes and I get home and the kids are in bed. If I don't eat nachos, I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. There's been something in the tradition I've set up for myself here in this routine and pattern that I hunger for that. Sunday night, that's what I want. If I have a Big Mac, it might be okay, but it's not going to truly satisfy me because I've set my hunger up for a certain kind of memory. It's the same thing when you go to your favorite restaurants, right? When you go to certain ones, you want certain things. I go to Chapala, I want chicken fajitas. I don't get a measly bean burrito, I've set up that memory, that way for me here, You go to various restaurants, there are certain things that you want, and don't vary from them because you won't be satisfied. That's what I found anyway. So set up for yourself in the same way that what you're hungering for food, make that the same with your life in pursuit of righteousness. Give your hunger for righteousness memory. If you want to grow in increasing your reading of the Word, set a time. Every morning when I get up and I get myself together here and I get my coffee, I'm going to sit down and read a chapter of the Bible. And if you do that enough, you're going to develop a memory for that, a hunger for that that's connected to it, right? And so if you get up and you get your coffee and you're ready for the day and you skip right over that, you're going to sense, I'm missing something. I didn't do this right. Something seems unsatisfied in me here. So give your hunger some memory connected to it that will help you to grow in righteousness. And number 4, exercise to increase your hunger. The more you do when you're working outside and that kind of thing, it builds in you, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I got to satisfy it more than just sitting around. In the same way, exercise your righteousness. Do something with it. Don't just talk about reading the Word of God more, or, prayer is really important, but you don't pray. Giving to the needy, that's really important. I'm glad somebody's doing that, but not me certainly. Exercise it so that you will need to fill yourself with more. I want to put these 4 before you today and tell you that Jesus promises if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you will be satisfied. You will be filled. If you are wanting these things that God is putting before you, He will give them to you. You will find satisfaction in them, and you will find a growing hunger and thirst in you to do it all the more. I'll leave you with this. Matthew 6:33, we've already read it. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. Life can be pretty confusing and overwhelming at times when you sit down and figure out all of the bills, all of the things, all of the stuff I'm supposed to do, the responsibilities, this list I have of all of these things I need to mark off this week. It can get overwhelming. But we come back to the simplicity of the gospel. Jesus says, seek me first. Seek my righteousness. This other stuff will fall into place. Seek His righteousness, hunger and thirst for Him, and you will be satisfied. It's a promise that Jesus makes for your life.